Senator Ted Cruz, thank you so much for your time. I want to start with the Supreme Court, and I just wanted to find out what the latest is as far as the Senate Republicans having the support to move forward with this nomination that the president is set to announce on Saturday.
I'm confident we're going to have the votes. The president is going to make his nomination. I expect him to nominate a serious, accomplished constitutionalist jurist. The Senate Judiciary Committee will then move promptly to convening hearings, considering the nominee, and I believe it is critical that we confirm that nominee before Election Day. I believe we will have the votes to do that and get it done before Election Day.
Why do you believe it's so important to have it before Election Day this year, which was a change in your position from 2016 when there was the same situation?
Well, nominating principled constitutionalists to the Supreme Court and to the federal judiciary is a big part of the reason that Donald Trump was elected president. And it's a big part of the reason why the American people voted for a Republican majority in the U.S. Senate. If you look at history, this scenario has occurred a total of 29 times in history. 29 times there's been a Supreme Court vacancy during a presidential election year. And the pattern we've seen throughout history, throughout more than 2 centuries of our nation's history, is all 29 times it has happened, the president has made a nomination. And what the Senate does has depended upon whether the Senate is of the same party as the president or a different party. 19 of those times, the president and the Senate have been of the same party, and the Senate's confirmed the justice 17 out of those 19 times. The other side, the other 10, were situations where the president and the Senate were of different parties. Barack Obama in 2016 was an example of that. And of those 10 times, the Senate has confirmed the nominee only twice. The history is clear that if the president and Senate are of the same party, the confirmation goes through, and if they're of a different party, the confirmation doesn't go through. And the reason for that, that's not just a question of partisan differentials. It is, in fact, the constitutional system of checks and balances. And in the last 3 elections we've had, the American people gave us a Republican majority in the Senate in 2014. They did so again in 2016. And in 2018, they grew our majority. And front and center in terms of why the voters did so, front and center why the people of Texas, I believe, re-elected me in 2018, is because I promised to lead the fight to confirm constitutionalist justices to the Supreme Court, to defend the Bill of Rights, to defend our free speech, to defend our religious liberty, to defend the Second Amendment. And by making this nomination, the president is delivering on his promise to the voters. And by the Senate confirming this nominee, the Republicans who made that promise are delivering on our promise to the voters.
So what do you say to Democrats who've accused you and other Senate Republicans that you're hypocrites?
Well, it's not surprising that the Democrats are dismayed, that their party has decided to go all in on supporting judicial activists from the bench, who legislate from the bench and who have a demonstrated hostility to free speech, to religious liberty, to the Second Amendment. They made their case. That was a big part of the case Hillary Clinton made to the American people in 2016, and the voters made a different decision. And elections have consequences. And in this instance, the fact that the American people elected a Republican president promising to nominate constitutionalists to the court, and the fact that the American people elected a Republican majority in the Senate promising to confirm constitutionalists, that's what puts us in a position to be able to deliver on that promise. And Jack, look, I'll point out, next week I've got a book coming out. It's called One Vote Away: How a Single Seat on the Supreme Court Can Change History. And the book comes out on Tuesday. Each chapter talks about a different constitutional right. So there's a chapter on free speech, there's a chapter on religious liberty, there's a chapter on the Second Amendment, there's a chapter on U.S. sovereignty, there's a chapter on democracy and elections. And each of those chapters tells war stories. It tells the inside story of major Supreme Court cases, landmark cases that I helped litigate. And it tells the readers, here's what's going on. And what's really stunning when you read the book is that on issue after issue after issue, the freedoms you and I care most about, they are one vote away. They're being decided 5-4 over and over and over again. The stakes are enormous. And so this is the most important responsibility we have, to deliver on this promise, to confirm a justice who will protect the Bill of Rights for 29 million Texans.
Well, what impact do you think that this seat is going to have on the 2020 election as far as galvanizing Republicans and conservatives and Democrats and liberals and progressives?
Well, I think it's likely to do both. There's no doubt that the far left is energized and enraged and angry. That was true before the Supreme Court vacancy, that we were seeing enormous rage and anger on the left. We're seeing rioting and protests in the street. We're seeing violence. We're seeing police cars being firebombed and citizens being assaulted and stores being burned and looted. That was before the vacancy, and unfortunately, where we are now, it kind of reminds me of the movie Spinal Tap. Now it goes to 11. I think their rage has only gotten angrier. I fully expect, when we have the confirmation hearing in the Senate Judiciary Committee, I fully expect Senate Democrats to do everything they can to drag the judicial nominee through the mud. We don't know who it's going to be. The president has said it's going to be a woman, and I'm sure it will be a highly accomplished, highly qualified nominee, and yet you're going to see the same sort of nasty personal attacks we saw with Justice Brett Kavanaugh. Those are going to be directed at this nominee as well. It's unfortunate that we have so much anger and partisan division, but I don't think that should dissuade us from doing our job and from following through on the promises we made to the voters. When the people of Texas elected me, I promised you I would fight to defend the Constitution and Bill of Rights and fight to confirm constitutionalist jurists to the federal bench. We've confirmed over 200 new judges to the federal bench nominated by President Trump. It's one of the biggest victories of the last 4 years, and it makes a real difference for helping protect the freedoms of Texans.
I wanted to ask you, from what we read, it seems like Judge Amy Coney Barrett is the leading candidate, and Barbara Lagoa is also being mentioned as well. What do you know about them?
Both are serious, well-respected judges. Both have a significant record. The United States Senate has confirmed both within the last couple of years, so we're familiar with those nominees. We've had hearings with those nominees previously. I think either one, if the Democrats try the kind of character assault and mudslinging that they've done in the past with Brett Kavanaugh, with Clarence Thomas, with Robert Bork, with Sam Alito. The Democrats have done this over and over again to judicial nominees. If they try that kind of smear with either of those judges, I think it's going to backfire. I think the American people will look at it and say, this is not how United States senators are expected to behave. We should treat each other with civility and respect. We ought to have a confirmation hearing discussing the substantive qualifications and record of whoever the nominee is. That's certainly what I'm going to do and what I hope my colleagues will do. But on the Democratic side of the aisle, I think we're going to see a lot more noise coming from that side.
I wanted to ask you about Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Before you were a senator, you were a Texas Solicitor General. You argued before the Supreme Court and Justice Ginsburg. So on a personal level, what was that like to go before Justice Ginsburg? What was she like? Did she ask tough questions? What was that like for you?
It was an extraordinary experience. I knew Justice Ginsburg personally. As you noted, I've argued 9 times in front of her. She was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. She was an amazing trailblazer, grew up in New York, went to Cornell, went to Harvard Law School, and then to Columbia Law School, was on the law review both places. She graduated, tied for first in her class in Columbia Law School. When she came out, she tried to clerk at the U.S. Supreme Court, and Justice Felix Frankfurter, renowned liberal man of the left, wouldn't hire her because she was a woman. Even though her law school professors were urging that she be hired, Justice Frankfurter said no. She tried to get hired as a lawyer. She had a very hard time. She ended up being offered jobs as a legal secretary, which is really, really disgraceful. She ended up becoming a leading academic, and then one of the top Supreme Court advocates to have ever lived. She was incredibly effective as a Supreme Court advocate, and she really was a trailblazer as a litigator for equal rights for women, for tearing down legal barriers that diminish the rights of women. Her litigation was very, very important. She served 27 years on the Supreme Court, and every time I argued in front of her questions, they were incisive, they were tough. She was a very, very good lawyer and a careful lawyer. And so there are cases I argued. One of the biggest cases I ever argued is a case called Medellin versus Texas, where Texas was standing up to the World Court and the United Nations and the President of the United States, George W. Bush. And I argued that case twice in front of the Supreme Court. I won it both times. The first time I won it, it was a 5-4 decision. We lost Sandra Day O'Connor, but thankfully picked up Justice Ginsburg's vote. And so she was the necessary 5th vote for Texas to prevail in that case. And at the end of the day, we won 6-3 with the Supreme Court striking down the World Court's order as violating U.S. sovereignty and striking down the President's order as contrary to the Constitution. So it was an enormous victory. I was grateful to get her vote in that case. In other cases, I didn't get her vote and she dissented, but whether she was with you or against you, she was an amazingly talented and effective judge and jurist, and her legacy, by any measure, she will go down in history as being one of the most consequential Supreme Court justices ever to serve.
Senator, I just had a couple of other questions. I know your time is short with us, but wanted to ask you about policing reform and where you are on that and where things stand in the Senate.
Well, I think it's really a shame that we have seen the far left, and including an awful lot of Democrats, getting behind this radical movement to defund the police and to abolish the police. That is a very, very dangerous and radical change. Even a few months ago, if I'd have suggested to you, Jack, the Democrats are going to try to defund or abolish the police, you'd have laughed at me and said, look, Ted, that's pretty extreme. No one's going to go that nutty. And yet that's where we are. We're seeing Democratic office holders pushing forward with that over and over again. We've seen New York City cutting $1 billion from the NYPD. We're seeing the Austin City Council cutting $150 million from the police department. They're slashing the police department by 1/3. That's really dangerous, and we're already seeing the consequences of this extreme agenda, in that we're seeing murder rates go up, we're seeing assault rates go up, we're seeing sexual assault rates grow up, and in terms of our families staying safe, having effective law enforcement officers that can stop criminals from threatening our families is critically important. The radicals who are attacking the police, their mantra is Black Lives Matter, and that statement is unquestionably true. Yes, absolutely Black Lives Matter, and when you defund or abolish the police, the predictable result that necessarily follows is a lot more Black lives are lost. We're seeing, as violent crime skyrockets in the inner cities in largely African American and Hispanic communities, we're seeing a lot more African American murder victims, innocent men and women who are being killed by violent criminals because the far left is undermining the ability of the police to do their job. I think that's really unfortunate. It's not serving the interest of Texans. It's not serving the interest of Americans.
Wanted to ask you about COVID-19. The economy has bounced back a little bit, but as you know, people are still hurting. So what is your prescription now as far as should more aid, unemployment money be given, federal money be given to people? Should that resume?
So we're facing right now in Texas and across the country 2 simultaneous crises. We have a public health crisis, the coronavirus pandemic. It is serious, and we've taken really extraordinary steps to combat it. At the same time, we're facing an economic crisis, and the economic crisis is massive. In the last 6 months, 51 million Americans have lost their job. I believe our #1 priority economically should be to reopen the economy, to get Texans back to work. As I travel the state, every part of the state, East Texas, West Texas, the Panhandle, all the way down to the Valley, what I hear from Texans over and over again is Texans want to work. We want to go to work. We want to provide for our families. Small businesses want to open their doors. So I've introduced legislation called the Recovery Act. The Recovery Act is designed to help the millions of small businesses that are just right now opening the doors. They're just right now starting to get back in business, and they're really hanging on the edge between surviving and going under. And the Recovery Act cuts taxes, cuts job-killing regulations, reduces the burdens on small businesses so they can grow, so they can prosper, so they can thrive, and so they can hire their employees back. Now, we need to do so in a way that's safe. We need to do so in a way that listens to sound science, that minimizes the risk of transmission of the virus. But Texans want to go to work. These shutdowns are hurting Texas and they're hurting the country, and we need to open up and allow people to go back to work.
Senator Ted Cruz, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it.